The world had shrunk to the size of my front window. From this dusty perch, I curated a life of quiet observation, a collection of moments that belonged to other people. I saw Mrs. Henderson's cat, a marmalade tyrant, stalk sparrows from the safety of her prize-winning rose bushes. I saw the gaggle of teenagers who used the corner lamppost as their unofficial parliament, their laughter echoing in the summer air like handfuls of thrown gravel. And I saw him, Alex, my mailman. He was a study in reliable constancy, a fixed point in my rotating anxieties. Every day, just after 1, the low grumble of his truck would announce his arrival, a sound that had become as integral to my afternoon as the weak tea I brewed for myself. I knew the specific squeak of his handbrake, the solid thud of the truck door closing. I knew the rhythm of his footsteps on the pavement, steady, unhurried, confident. He moved with an economy of motion that suggested a deep comfort in his own skin, a comfort I had only ever read about in books. For 2 years, this had been our ritual. He would walk up my cracked concrete path, his blue uniform a stark slash of color against the muted greens and browns of my neglected garden. He would slide the junk mail and the occasional bill through the slot, the soft rasp of paper a prelude to his departure. Sometimes, if a package was too large, he would ring the bell. Those were the good days. On those days, I would smooth my shirt, run a hand through my perpetually messy hair, and open the door, my heart performing a frantic, unscheduled tap dance against my ribs. Our exchanges were masterpieces of brevity. "Package for Julian Croft," he would say, his voice a low, pleasant rumble that always seemed to vibrate somewhere deep in my chest. He never shortened my name. Always Julian. It felt formal and oddly intimate at the same time. "Thanks, Alex," I'd reply, my own voice tight and thin. I knew his name from the small tag pinned to his shirt, and the first time I had used it, a flicker of something, surprise, recognition, had crossed his face. He had a nice face, strong jaw, a smattering of faint freckles across his nose that you only noticed when the sun hit him just right. His eyes were the color of moss after a rain, and they always met mine directly, without any of the nervous flitting I was so accustomed to in myself. He was, by all accounts, straight. I'd seen him once, months ago, at the downtown farmer's market. He was with a woman, a pretty blonde with a laugh like wind chimes. He had his arms slung casually around her shoulders, a gesture of easy ownership that sent a familiar, dull ache through me. I had ducked behind a stall of overpriced organic kale, my face burning, feeling like a spy caught in the act. The observation was supposed to be one-sided. My secret to keep. Seeing him in his own life, a life where I was nothing more than a name on a package, had felt like a violation of the unspoken rules I had created. So I kept my distance, my admiration locked away behind a carefully constructed wall of polite nods and brief thanks. He was a part of my landscape, like the old oak tree at the end of the street. Something beautiful and strong to look at, but ultimately, untouchable. I was a quiet, solitary man who illustrated children's books from a spare bedroom. A man whose most exciting social interaction was debating the merits of different brands of cat food with the cashier at the grocery store. He was Alex, the handsome mailman with the steady gaze and the life that hummed along somewhere out of my view. We were two different species. That day, the sky was the color of a bruise. A heavy, humid stillness had settled over the neighborhood, promising a storm that had yet to break. The air was thick, difficult to breathe, and it mirrored the dense anxiety coiling in my stomach. I was waiting on a package, one I had ordered late one night in a fit of loneliness and what I could only describe as hopeful desperation. The confirmation email had been sitting in my inbox for a week, a digital monument to my own foolishness. The tracking information said it was out for delivery. With Alex, the usual grumble of his truck sounded different, somehow heavier in the oppressive air. I watched from my window as he pulled to the curb. He sorted through a few letters, his movements as precise and familiar as ever. But he didn't get out right away. He just sat there for a moment, his head tilted back against the seat, his eyes closed. It was a crack in the facade of his easy competence, a fleeting glimpse of something I couldn't name. Weariness, maybe. He finally swung out of the truck, a small, unassuming brown box in his hand. My box. My stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. He walked up the path, and I waited for the familiar rasp of the mail slot. It didn't come. Instead, There was silence. A beat. Then another. Then the firm, decisive press of the doorbell. My breath hitched. I went through the usual motions, smoothed the shirt, checked my hair, but my hands were trembling. I opened the door, preparing my tight, polite smile. The air outside was electric, charged with unspoken things. Rain was coming. He stood on my porch, the box held loosely in one hand. The humidity had curled the edges of his dark hair, and a fine sheen of sweat glistened on his temples. He wasn't smiling his usual professional, detached smile. His expression was unreadable, his green eyes focused intently on mine. "Package for Julian Croft," he said, his voice lower than usual, almost a murmur against the thick silence. "Thanks, Alex," I managed, reaching for the box. My fingers brushed against his, and a jolt, sharp and startling, shot up my arm. He didn't pull away. His gaze didn't waver. He held onto the box. "This one needs a signature," he said. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie. The sender didn't require signatures. It wasn't valuable, not in a monetary sense. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Oh, okay. Do you have a—" I trailed off, expecting him to produce one of those digital scanners. He shook his head slowly, a barely perceptible motion. His eyes held mine, and the world seemed to narrow to the few feet of space between us on my worn-out welcome mat. The air crackled. The first drop of rain hit the concrete path with a dark, audible splat. Then he said the words that tilted my carefully balanced world on its axis. He took a small step closer, lowering his voice even further, forcing me to lean in. "Sign inside." My mind went completely blank. Inside. The word echoed in the sudden emptiness of my thoughts. He wanted to come inside. The mailman. Alex. My Alex, the one from my window, wanted to cross the threshold. The rain began to fall in earnest now, fat drops splattering on his shoulders, darkening the blue of his uniform. He didn't seem to notice. He just stood there, waiting, the unassuming brown box a silent offering between us. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I could feel the thudding in my ears, a panicked rhythm that threatened to drown out the sound of the growing storm. He was still looking at me, his moss-green eyes searching my face for something. An answer. Permission. The rain was coming down harder, plastering his dark hair to his forehead. He didn't flinch. He just waited, patient as a statue, while my entire internal world caught fire. "Oh," I said, the sound small and inadequate. "Right. Of course. Come in." The words felt clumsy, foreign in my mouth. I stepped back, pulling the door wider, and the stale, familiar air of my house, the scent of old books, turpentine, and loneliness, rushed out to meet the fresh, rain-washed scent of him. He stepped across the threshold, and the dynamic shifted instantly. He was no longer the mailman on the porch. He was a presence in my home. The space, which had always felt cavernous and empty, suddenly seemed small, crowded by his sheer physicality. He was taller than I'd realized, broader. The damp fabric of his uniform clung to his shoulders, outlining the solid muscle beneath. He brought the storm inside with him, the smell of ozone, the cool dampness, the raw energy of the world outside. He handed me the box, his fingers brushing mine again. This time the touch lingered, a deliberate, feather-light pressure that sent a fresh wave of heat through my veins. I fumbled with the package, my hands suddenly clumsy and useless. I set it on the small entryway table, my back to him, needing a moment to compose myself. I could feel his gaze on me, a tangible weight on the back of my neck. I don't have a pen right here," I stammered, turning back to face him. It was a stupid thing to say. My house was full of pens, pencils, charcoal sticks. I was an artist, but my brain had ceased all normal function. A slow smile touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't the professional smile from the porch. This one was different. Knowing. A little mischievous. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice a low thrum that seemed to settle in my bones. "I'm not really here for a signature," my breath caught. I just stared at him, my mind a swirling vortex of confusion and a terrifying, burgeoning hope. What was happening? This was Alex. My mailman. The man from the farmer's market. The untouchable constant. And he was standing in my entryway, dripping rainwater onto my hardwood floors, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. I became acutely aware of everything. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound I usually tuned out, was now deafeningly loud. The rain hammered against the roof, a frantic, percussive beat. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap mixed with the wild scent of the storm. I watched a single drop of water trace a path from his hairline down his temple, and I had the absurd, overwhelming urge to reach out and wipe it away. He took a step closer, closing the small distance between us. My personal space, usually a fortress, was breached. He was so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He looked around my living room, his gaze sweeping over the stacks of books, the easel in the corner draped with a dusty sheet, the half-finished canvases leaning against the wall. "You're Julian Croft, the artist," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to find my voice. He knew. He knew who I was beyond the name on the mail. How? Had he looked me up? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "I've seen your stuff online," he continued, his eyes finally settling back on my face. "The birds. I like the birds, my illustrations." He was talking about my work. The most private, personal part of me. I specialized in detailed, almost photorealistic drawings of local birds, a niche that had earned me a small but loyal following online and a few contracts for children's science books. It was my passion, the one thing I felt I was truly good at. And he knew about it. "You do?" The question came out as a squeak. I cleared my throat. "Thank you, the crow," he said, his gaze intense. "The one with the piece of foil in its beak. That one's my favorite. The look in its eye, it's like it knows something no one else does." He was talking about The Collector, a piece I had finished months ago. It was my own favorite, a portrait of a bird that seemed to hold a universe of ancient secrets behind its intelligent, black eyes. That he had not only seen it, but remembered it, and understood it, it was disarming. It felt like he had reached inside me and touched something vital. "He's just a scavenger," I mumbled, deflecting the intensity of his focus. "We're all scavengers, Julian," he said softly. "Picking up shiny things to make our nests feel a little less empty." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. His eyes were so direct, so searching. It felt like he was seeing past the awkward, stammering man and into the core of my loneliness. A comfortable silence settled between us, punctuated only by the storm. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a space for breathing. I watched him, really watched him, not as an object of my secret pining, but as a man who had just quoted the subtext of my own art back to me. He glanced down at the box on the table. The box. My mortifying secret. A faint blush crept up my neck. I prayed he wouldn't ask what was inside. As if reading my mind, he gave another one of those slow, knowing smiles. Some packages are more interesting than others. He wasn't going to let it go. Of course he wasn't. This was Alex, the man who moved with purpose, who had just manufactured a reason to enter my house. He was an instigator, and I was helplessly caught in his orbit. The situation was so far outside the realm of my normal life that it felt like a dream, a strange, humid fever dream set to the soundtrack of a summer storm. I decided, in a moment of uncharacteristic bravery, to meet his challenge head-on. "It's a personal item, I figured," he said, his voice laced with a humor that wasn't mocking, but shared. "The return address is from a company called Cosmic Delights. Doesn't sound like they sell tax software." My face was on fire. He had read the return address. He knew. He had stood on my porch, holding my new, top-of-the-line, ridiculously expensive vibrator, and asked to come inside. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my chest, and to my utter shock, I let it out. It was a rusty and used sound, but it was real. His smile widened into a genuine grin, and it transformed his entire face. The serious, steady mailman was gone, replaced by someone younger, more playful. "There it is," he said, as if he'd been waiting for it. "You are unbelievable," I said, shaking my head, a real smile finally breaking through my anxiety. "Just doing my job," he replied, his eyes twinkling. Ensuring secure delivery of sensitive materials, the banter felt surprisingly natural, an easy back and forth that I hadn't experienced with anyone in years. The pretense was gone. He knew my secret, the embarrassing one in the box, and, I was beginning to suspect, the much larger one in my heart. The power dynamic had been completely upended. He wasn't just the object of my observation anymore. He was an active participant. He was, in fact, directing the entire scene. "Well, it's securely delivered," I said, gesturing vaguely at the box. So, thank you. It was a weak attempt to end the encounter, to regain some semblance of control. He didn't take the hint. He leaned a hip against the entryway table, crossing his arms over his broad chest. A casual, settled posture. He wasn't going anywhere. The thing is, he said, his tone shifting from playful to something more serious. I've been delivering your mail for 2 years. Bills, magazines, the occasional package from Cosmic Delights, and every time I walk up that path, and I wonder what's going on in here. He tapped his temple. Behind the artist's eyes, my heart stuttered. He had been thinking about me. While I was watching him from my window, he had been, in his own way, watching me back. The idea was so staggering, so world-altering, that I couldn't process it. Not much. I lied, my gaze dropping to the floor. Just birds. I don't believe that, he said softly. I looked up, and his expression was open, vulnerable in a way I hadn't expected. I see the way you look at things. Even when you're just signing for a package. You're not just looking, you're studying. Taking in every detail. I wanted to know what it felt like to be on this side of the door. To be the one being looked at by you. This was too much. The confession was so direct, so unexpected. He was laying his cards on the table, and I was still fumbling to even find my deck. A wave of fear washed over me. Fear of what he was implying, fear of what I wanted him to be implying. It was safer in my window, in the world of unrequited longing. That was a familiar ache, a comfortable pain. This new territory was terrifying. I don't know what you mean, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It was a retreat, a desperate scramble back to the safety of my shell. He sighed, a quiet puff of air. He didn't look disappointed, just patient. He pushed off the table and took the final step that separated us. He was so close now I could see the individual specks of green and gold in his irises. He slowly, deliberately, raised his hand. I flinched, my body tensing for a rejection I was sure was coming. But his touch, when it came, was impossibly gentle. He laid his palm against my cheek, his thumb stroking softly just below my eye. His hand was warm and slightly rough, the hand of a man who worked for a living. The contact was electric, 1,000 tiny volts of lightning on my skin. Yes, you do, he whispered, his gaze unwavering. You know exactly what I mean. And in that moment, under the gentle pressure of his hand, with the storm raging outside and a cosmic delight sitting in a box on my table, I knew he was right. I did know. I had known for 2 years, in the secret, hopeful part of my heart. I just never, in my wildest dreams, thought he might know it too. Time seemed to stretch and warp, the space between his words and my reaction filled with the thunderous beating of my own heart. His hand was still on my cheek, a warm, grounding presence in the dizzying spiral of my thoughts. His thumb continued its slow, hypnotic caress, and my body, starved for touch, leaned into it instinctively. It was a betrayal of my fear, a surrender my mind hadn't yet agreed to. I am here. This is real. The thoughts are sharp, present tense. His eyes are searching mine, and there is no artifice in them, no game. There is a raw, undisguised question there, a vulnerability that mirrors my own. He initiated this. He crossed the threshold and closed the distance, but now he is waiting. He has given me the power and the terrifying choice of what to do with it. My gaze dropped to his lips. They were fuller than I'd imagined, the bottom one slightly chapped from the wind. The thought of kissing him was a sudden, violent impact, a fantasy so old and deeply buried it felt like an archaeological discovery. It was a sacred relic I had kept polished in the museum of my mind, never meant for the light of day. And now, it was a tangible possibility, breathing the same charged air as me. I raised my eyes back to his. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Words were inadequate, clumsy tools for the monumental thing that was happening between us. Instead, I lifted my own hand, my movements shaky and uncertain, and placed it over his, pressing his palm more firmly against my skin. It was my answer, my permission, my surrender. A flicker of relief, so profound it was almost painful to witness, washed over his face. The tension in his shoulders eased. He hadn't been sure. Even with all his confidence, his playful instigation, he had been just as terrified as I was. The realization was a balm to my frayed nerves. We were just 2 men, standing in a hallway, hoping not to be made fools of. He leaned in, his movements agonizingly slow, giving me every opportunity to pull away. The scent of him intensified, rain and soap and something uniquely Alex, a warm, musky scent that was intoxicating. My eyes fluttered closed. I felt the soft brush of his breath against my lips, a warm promise. And then, his mouth was on mine. The kiss was not what I had expected. My fantasies had always been dramatic, desperate things, full of pent-up passion and cinematic flair. This was quiet. It was soft. It was a question, a gentle exploration. His lips were tentative at first, brushing against mine as if testing the waters. There was no pressure, no demand. It was a kiss of profound patience. I responded with my own timid uncertainty, a mirror of his gentleness. A small, almost inaudible sound escaped my throat, a sigh of disbelief and relief. Hearing it, feeling the tremor of my response, seemed to embolden him. He deepened the kiss, a slow, deliberate pressure that sent a shockwave of pleasure through my entire system. His other hand came up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me steady as the world tilted beneath my feet. It was a conversation without words. It spoke of lonely afternoons and unspoken observations, of a curiosity that had grown into something more. It was the closing of a distance I had once thought infinite. My hands, which had been frozen at my sides, came alive. One clutched at the damp fabric of his shirt, bunching the material in a desperate grip. The other slid up his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. It was racing as fast as my own. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We didn't move away. We rested our foreheads together, our breath mingling in the small space between us. I kept my eyes closed, trying to commit every sensation to memory. The warmth of his skin, the weight of his hands on me, the lingering taste of him on my lips. It was too much to process, too wonderful. I was afraid that if I opened my eyes, he would be gone, a mirage conjured by the storm and my own desperate longing. "Julian," he murmured, his voice thick and rough. I opened my eyes. He was still there, real. His green eyes were dark with emotion, his expression so open and unguarded it made my chest ache. "Hi," I whispered, the only word I could manage. It was absurd. It was perfect. A slow grin spread across his face. "Hi." He leaned in and gave me another kiss, this one quicker, more confident. A punctuation mark, an exclamation point. "So," he said, pulling back just enough to look at me. That was better than a signature. The tension broke, and I laughed, a real, full-bodied sound this time. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for years felt distant, a faint echo from another life. "Just a little," I admitted. He finally let me go, though his hands lingered on my arms as he stepped back. The absence of his warmth was immediate and acute. I felt a pang of panic, the fear that he was about to turn and leave, that this had just been a moment of madness, a curiosity satisfied. He must have seen the fear in my eyes. His expression softened. "Hey," he said gently, "I'm not going anywhere. Unless you want me to." "No," I said, the word rushing out, too fast, too eager. "Don't go." "Good," he said simply. He looked around the entryway again, then back at me. "So, you going to offer a guy a cup of coffee? It's a little wet out there for my route." He gestured vaguely towards the window, where the rain was now coming down in solid, gray sheets. Coffee. It was so normal, so wonderfully, beautifully mundane. It was an anchor in the storm of what had just happened. Yes, coffee. Of course. I felt like I was learning to walk again, my limbs clumsy and uncoordinated. I turned and led the way to my small kitchen, hyper-aware of him following behind me. His presence filled the space, changing its very nature. This was no longer just my kitchen. It was the place I was making coffee for Alex. The kitchen was small and cluttered, a testament to my chaotic inner life. Jars of pens and brushes sat next to the salt and pepper shakers. A stack of art books teetered precariously on one corner of the table. I started clearing a space, my movements jerky and self-conscious. "Don't," he said, stopping me with a light touch on my arm. "I like it. It's real." He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table, looking completely at ease, as if he'd been sitting in my messy kitchen his whole life. He picked up one of the books, an Audubon anthology, and flipped through it with interest. I busied myself with the coffee maker, the familiar ritual of comfort. Measuring the grounds, filling the carafe, the gurgle and hiss of the machine. I could feel him watching me. I was still being observed, but now it was different. It was reciprocal. I snuck glances at him over my shoulder. He looked so right sitting there, the dark blue of his uniform a striking contrast to the warm, worn wood of my kitchen table. The scene felt both completely surreal and deeply, fundamentally correct. I brought 2 mugs to the table and sat down opposite him. I watched his hands as he wrapped them around the warm ceramic. They were strong, capable hands, the knuckles slightly scraped, the nails neatly trimmed. The hands that delivered my mail. The hands that had cupped my face so gently. "So," I said, my voice still a little shaky. 2 years, he looked up from his mug, his eyes meeting mine over the rim. 2 years, he confirmed. Long time to walk up a path and wonder, what were you wondering? I needed to know. I needed to understand how this had happened, how our 2 parallel lines had so suddenly, impossibly, converged. He took a sip of his coffee, considering the question. At first, it was just curiosity. "You were quiet. You never made small talk. Everyone else on my route, they want to talk about the weather, their dogs, their grandkids. You just took your mail and disappeared. You were a mystery," he continued, his voice low and thoughtful. "Then I saw your name on a magazine, an art journal. There was a little feature on your work. I went online. I saw the birds," he smiled. "And the mystery got deeper. Because the man who disappears behind the door wasn't the same man who was creating this intense, beautiful stuff. There was this huge, vibrant world in your art, and I couldn't square it with the quiet guy on the porch." I felt a flush of pleasure and embarrassment. He had been paying so much more attention than I had ever dared to imagine. "And then," he said, his gaze becoming more intense, "I started noticing other things. The way you'd be at the window sometimes when I pulled up. The way your breath would catch when our hands brushed. I thought maybe, I hoped, that the quiet guy was just shy, and that maybe the mystery wasn't just one-sided, he had seen it all. My pathetic, transparent pining. My window vigils. My heart on my sleeve. The wall I thought was so impenetrable had been made of glass all along. And the woman at the farmer's market?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. I winced, regretting it instantly. It was too much, too soon. He didn't seem fazed. He just sighed, a hint of sadness in the sound. "My sister. She was in town for the weekend. We're close," he looked at me, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "You saw us." I nodded, my face burning with shame. I hid behind the kale, he let out a soft laugh. "Hiding behind the kale?" he repeated, shaking his head. "Julian, you don't have to hide." The storm outside raged on, but inside my small, cluttered kitchen, a different kind of storm was beginning to settle. The chaos of confusion and disbelief was giving way to a fragile, tentative calm. He wasn't a fantasy. He was Alex. He liked my art. He had a sister. He drank his coffee black. He was real. And he was here. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds the drumming of the rain and the soft clink of our mugs. The air was thick with unspoken things, but it was no longer a tense, anxious thickness. It was the quiet, humming energy of a beginning. The question of what now hung between us, a shimmering, delicate bubble I was afraid to touch. He was the one who broke the silence. He reached across the table, his fingers covering mine where they rested on the worn wood. His touch was warm and sure. "So," he said, his voice soft, but his gaze direct. "This box from Cosmic Delights. Are you going to tell me what's inside, or do I have to use my imagination?" A laugh escaped me, sharp and surprised. The sheer, playful audacity of the man was a constant shock to my system. My face flushed a deep crimson, but for the first time, the embarrassment was tinged with something else. A thrill. The intimacy of the question, the casual way he asked it, felt like another wall crumbling down. "You have a hell of an imagination, I'm sure," I retorted, finding a sliver of my own wit. "But I think some mysteries are better left unsolved," he grinned, a slow, roguish smile that made my stomach do a complicated little knot. "Fair enough," he conceded, his thumb tracing lazy circles on the back of my hand. "But for the record, I hope it's something fun." The subtext was a roaring fire. My mind, usually so adept at overthinking and predicting worst-case scenarios, was short-circuiting. He was talking about a sex toy. He was holding my hand. He had kissed me. These facts refused to align in any logical way with the reality I had inhabited just an hour ago. I decided to change the subject, to steer us back to slightly safer, if equally terrifying, waters. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "When the storm stops," the playfulness in his expression softened, replaced by a sincere gravity. He squeezed my hand. "When the storm stops," he said slowly, deliberately, "I'm going to have to finish my route. I'm going to go home. And then, if you'll let me, I'm going to come back. Not in a uniform. Not with a package. Just as Alex." The simplicity and directness of his plan was breathtaking. There was no ambiguity, no room for my anxious mind to twist his words into something else. He wanted to come back. Just as Alex. "And me?" I asked, the question fragile. "I'll just be Julian." "You've always just been Julian to me," he said, and the way he said it, the quiet conviction in his tone, made me believe him. The brilliant, shy, hiding behind the kale Julian. We finished our coffee, the conversation drifting to easier topics. He asked more about my art, and I found myself talking about it with an ease I rarely felt. I told him about the long hours spent in the field, waiting for the perfect light, the frustration of a line that wouldn't go right, the small, quiet joy of capturing a creature's spirit on paper. He listened intently, his chin resting on his hand, his green eyes never leaving my face. He didn't just hear the words, he seemed to absorb them. In turn, he told me about his life. He'd grown up in a small town a few hours away, had tried college for a year before realizing it wasn't for him. He liked being outside, liked the rhythm and routine of the mail route. It gave him time to think. He talked about his sister, a teacher in Oregon, and his parents, who were retired and spent their time traveling in an RV. His life sounded so normal, so grounded. It was a world away from my cloistered, introspective existence. As he spoke, I studied the details of his face. The way a small scar cut through his left eyebrow. The faint lines that fanned out from the corners of his eyes when he smiled. The slight crookedness of his front tooth. These were the details I could have never seen from my window. This was the texture of the real man, not the idealized figure of my imagination. And somehow, he was even better. More interesting. More human. The rain began to lessen, the frantic drumming on the roof softening to a steady, rhythmic patter. A pale, watery light began to filter through the kitchen window. The storm was passing. A knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. Our time was running out. The real world was waiting to intrude. Alex seemed to feel it too. The easy flow of our conversation slowed. He looked out the window, then back at me. "It's letting up," he said, a statement of fact that felt loaded with regret. "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. He pushed his chair back and stood up. I followed him back to the entryway, my feet feeling like lead. The magical, suspended reality of the last hour was dissolving. He was putting his mailman persona back on, squaring his shoulders, his expression becoming more professional. At the door, he paused. He turned to face me, and for a moment, the mask slipped. The intense, vulnerable Alex was back. "Tonight?" he asked. "Can I come back tonight?" "Around 7. "Yes," I said immediately, the relief so sharp it was dizzying. "7 is good, okay," he nodded, a decisive, satisfied motion. He reached for the doorknob, but then hesitated. He looked at me, then at the box still sitting on the entryway table. A mischievous glint returned to his eyes. He leaned in close, his voice a conspiratorial whisper in my ear. "And Julian?" "Yeah," I whispered back, my breath catching. "Read the instruction manual." And with that, he turned, opened the door, and walked out into the damp, clean-smelling world, leaving me standing in my hallway, my face on fire, my heart soaring. I watched through the window as he walked back to his truck, his steps just as steady and confident as they always were. But this time I knew. I knew he was walking away only so that he could come back. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of surreal energy. The world looked the same, but it was fundamentally different. The colors seemed brighter, the air fresher. My house, usually a sanctuary of silence, felt charged, humming with the echo of his presence. I wandered from room to room, touching the chair he'd sat in, the mug he'd drunk from, as if to confirm that it had all been real. I tried to work, to sit at my drafting table and lose myself in the familiar crosshatching of a blue jay's wing, but it was impossible. My focus was shot. My mind kept replaying every moment, every word, every look. The gentle pressure of his hand on my cheek. The soft, patient exploration of his lips. the low rumble of his voice saying my name. It was a dizzying, intoxicating loop. And then there was the box. It sat on the entryway table, a monument to my mortification and the catalyst for this insane, wonderful turn of events. His final words echoed in my ears. Read the instruction manual. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated cheek of him. I found myself smiling, a wide, foolish grin that I couldn't seem to wipe off my face. He was playful. He was bold. He was everything I wasn't, and it was exhilarating. At 6 o'clock, a fresh wave of panic hit me. He was coming back. In an hour. As Alex. Not as the mailman, but as a man coming to see another man. A date? Was this a date? My apartment was a mess. I was a mess. I flew into a cleaning frenzy, stuffing piles of books into shelves, hiding canvases under the sofa, scrubbing the kitchen sink with a vengeance. I was trying to erase the evidence of my solitary, cluttered life, to present a version of myself that was less me. I stopped, leaning on the vacuum cleaner, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What was I doing? He had seen my messy house. He had sat in my cluttered kitchen. He had looked at it all and said, I like it. It's real. He wasn't coming to see a curated, perfect version of me. He was coming to see Julian, the man who hid behind the kale. So I left the stack of art books on the table. I left my favorite worn-out mug by the sink. I showered and changed, not into anything fancy, but into a clean pair of jeans and a soft, gray sweater that I loved. I looked at myself in the mirror. The same anxious face looked back at me, but something was different. The perpetual tension around my eyes had eased. There was a hint of color in my cheeks that had nothing to do with exertion. I looked hopeful. At 5 minutes to 7, I was sitting on my sofa, my hands clasped together so tightly my knuckles were white. My heart was doing that frantic tap dance again. What if he didn't show up? What if he'd had time to think, to regret his impulsive actions? What if this was all some kind of cruel, elaborate joke? My old anxieties, my familiar companions, came creeping back, whispering their poisonous doubts in my ear. And then, at exactly 7 o'clock, I heard the sound of a car engine. Not the low grumble of the mail truck, but the quieter purr of a sedan. Headlights swept across my living room wall. A car door shut. Footsteps, the same steady, familiar rhythm, came up my cracked concrete path. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked to the door. This time, I didn't hesitate. I pulled it open. He stood on my porch, bathed in the soft yellow light. He was wearing dark jeans and a simple black t-shirt that stretched across his chest. No uniform, no mailbag, just Alex. He was holding a brown paper bag that smelled deliciously of garlic and spices. He smiled, a little shyly this time. The bold instigator was gone, replaced by someone who seemed just as nervous as I was. Hi, he said. I brought Thai food. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I got a little bit of everything. My heart swelled with an emotion so strong it almost buckled my knees. It was such a simple, thoughtful gesture. It was so normal. Hi, I replied, my voice thick. Everything is perfect. I stepped back to let him in, and he crossed the threshold for the second time that day. This time, it felt different. More deliberate. This wasn't an impulse born of a storm. This was a choice. He had chosen to come back. I had chosen to let him in. We ate sitting on the floor of my living room, using the coffee table as our makeshift dining table. We unpacked the containers of pad thai, green curry, and spring rolls. The awkwardness of a first date was there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was tempered by the strange, intense intimacy of the afternoon's events. We had already skipped past the usual preliminaries. We had already kissed. We had already admitted, in our own ways, that we had been watching each other for a very long time. The conversation flowed more easily this time, without the shock and disbelief of our earlier encounter. We talked about movies we liked, places we'd traveled, the stupid jobs we'd had in our 20s. I learned that he was a surprisingly good cook, that he had a ridiculous fear of spiders, and that he spent his weekends hiking the trails in the nearby state park. I found myself laughing, really laughing, at his stories. I felt a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. After we ate, we sat on the sofa, a comfortable distance between us. The energy in the room shifted, the easy camaraderie of dinner giving way to a more charged awareness of each other. I could feel the heat of his body, could smell the faint, clean scent of his laundry detergent mixed with the lingering aroma of curry. He turned to me, his expression serious. "Julian," he began, his voice low, "I need to be completely honest with you. This is new for me." My stomach dropped. Here it comes, I thought. The retraction. The "I'm not really gay" speech. "I've never done this before," he continued, gesturing vaguely between the two of us. "With a guy? I've always dated women. I thought that's who I was. But for the last year, maybe longer, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. About the quiet man in the house with the beautiful, sad birds." He looked down at his hands, a rare flicker of uncertainty on his face. I told myself it was just curiosity, an obsession with a mystery, but it was more than that. Watching you, even for just a few seconds each day, was the brightest part of my route. And I realized it wasn't the mystery I was drawn to. It was you. And that scared the hell out of me. He finally looked up, his green eyes pleading for understanding. Today, with the storm and that ridiculous package, it just felt like a sign. Like the universe was telling me to stop being a coward and just knock on the door. I don't know what this is or where it's going. All I know is that when I kissed you this afternoon, it felt right. More right than anything has felt in a very long time. I was floored. His confession was so raw, so honest. He was just as lost and uncertain as I was, just as terrified. He had laid his own vulnerability bare, offering it to me like a gift. It was my turn to be brave. "I've been in love with you since the first week you took over the route," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush before I could stop them. My own confession, the secret I had guarded for 2 years, spoken aloud. It felt like releasing a breath I'd been holding forever. His eyes widened, a look of stunned disbelief on his face. "What?" he whispered. "I know," I said, a humorless laugh escaping me. "Pathetic, right? The lonely artist pining for the handsome, straight mailman. It's a cliché, no," he said, his voice firm. He moved closer, closing the distance between us on the sofa. "It's not pathetic. It's everything." He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. All this time, we were both just standing on opposite sides of a window. He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles. The gesture was so tender, so full of unspoken emotion, that it made my throat ache. He didn't let go of my hand. He just held it, his thumb stroking mine, as a comfortable, profound silence settled over us. In that quiet moment, with our hands intertwined, the last of my fear finally fell away. It didn't matter that he was new to this. It didn't matter that I was hopelessly out of practice. All that mattered was that he was here, and he was honest. And when he looked at me, I felt seen. Truly seen, for the first time in my life. He leaned in, and I met him halfway. The kiss this time was different again. It wasn't the tentative question of the afternoon, or the quick, confident punctuation mark. This was a kiss of mutual understanding, of shared vulnerability. It was slow and deep and breathtakingly honest. It was the kiss of two lonely people who had finally, miraculously, found their way home. When we eventually broke apart, he didn't pull away. He rested his head on my shoulder, his arm wrapping around my waist, pulling me close. I leaned my head against his, breathing in his scent, feeling the solid, reassuring weight of him against me. We sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just breathing together in the quiet of my living room. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 10, its deep, resonant bongs marking the passage of time, but for once, I wasn't afraid of what was coming next. "Stay," I whispered into the darkness, the word a soft plea against the fabric of his shirt. He shifted, lifting his head to look at me. In the dim light from the street lamp outside, I could see the soft, unguarded expression on his face. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I was more sure of this than I had been of anything in my entire life. He didn't need any more convincing. He stood up, pulling me gently to my feet. He kept my hand in his as I led him down the short hallway to my bedroom. The room was simple, Spartan even. A bed, a dresser, a single canvas on the wall, a half-finished portrait of a barn owl, its wide, dark eyes staring out into the room. There was a moment of awkward hesitation at the foot of the bed, the unspoken question of what came next hanging in the air. The charged energy was back, a low thrum of anticipation and nerves. He seemed to sense my anxiety. He reached out, his hands cupping my face, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. "Hey," he said softly, his eyes searching mine. "Just this. Okay. Just sleeping. I just want to be near you." The relief was so immense it felt like a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. The pressure, the expectation, it all just vanished. He wasn't here for a conquest. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He just wanted what I wanted. Proximity, closeness, the simple, profound comfort of not being alone. We undressed in the semi-darkness, a silent, shared modesty between us. I slid under the cool sheets, my body tense and hyper-aware. A moment later, the mattress dipped behind me, and I felt the warmth of his body settle in next to mine. He didn't touch me right away. He just lay there, his presence a solid, reassuring weight in the quiet of the room. After a moment, he rolled onto his side, facing me. An arm slid around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. He was warm and solid, a human anchor in the dark. I felt his lips press a soft, chaste kiss to my shoulder blade. "Good night, Julian," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. "Good night, Alex," I whispered back. I lay there for a long time, listening to the sound of his breathing, deep and even as he drifted off to sleep. His arm was a comforting weight around me, his body a shield against the world. I had spent so many nights in this bed, consumed by a loneliness so vast it felt like a physical entity in the room with me. But tonight, for the first time, the bed wasn't empty. I wasn't alone. The man from my window, the man who had been a figment of my longing, was real, and he was here, holding me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I closed my eyes, a slow, happy smile spreading across my face, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I fell asleep without fear. I just felt safe. I felt like I'd come home.